Welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cone, and it's my pleasure to serve as host for this podcast series. Today, our guest is Matthew Karmel. He is a lawyer at Offit Kurman, and he practices in environmental sustainability in waste and recycling. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to hear everything you have to tell us today. But let's start with how you got to be a lawyer practicing in sustainability and environmental law. What brought you to this?
So the answer at first is I kind of fell into it. So when I was in law school, I actually thought I wanted to do bankruptcy law because of my mathematics background and some of the intersections of things that I thought would be very interesting in that. But during my summer associateship at a law firm in the US, they looked at my background and asked me to try some environmental matters. And frankly, I loved it. And so I then started as a young lawyer in a group focusing purely on environmental, but with a broad range of things, hazardous waste cleanups, natural resources, permitting, compliance, litigation, insurance, a really broad cross-section of things relating to environmental matters. And I'd say about 4 years, 5 years into my career, I started to think about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what's the meaning that I'm deriving from my career, where is my career going? And I saw two things at the same time. One was that I wanted to do more environmental work that was more planet aligned to me. And so I started looking for, okay, what does that look like? How do I make the shift to, and I didn't know at the time whether the word was sustainability or climate or ESG or which word was going to define my career. But I just started to look for ways to move that made me feel better about things that I was doing. And at the same time, I started looking at, okay, where are the business opportunities, right? Where can I go that I am going to have a career? Because in the path that I was on, it was a little bit crowded, to be honest, right? And so I happened to see this intersection of climate-friendly, planet-friendly work and shifting my practice a little bit from sort of like purely environmental to supporting doing environmental work for climate-friendly businesses, the waste and recycling industries, the renewable energy industry. I actually got heavily involved in food waste recycling and composting efforts and kind of became known as the food waste or composting lawyer in New Jersey, where I was at the time. And that was a great example to me of you can get really, really hyper specific and focused and still have access to lots of clients. At first, I didn't really think there were going to be that many composting clients, but there were, and they were of a whole bunch of varieties, right? They were small businesses, there were private equity firms, there were insurance issues, real estate issues, corporate issues, labor and employment issues, all of these different pieces, which I was able to bring together and have resources to solve those problems for that industry. And it being a very climate friendly industry was something that I was very interested in. So I went on this kind of like journey that I'm talking about of looking for not necessarily where could I do subject matter climate work, but where could I find climate businesses or opportunities that I could smooth the legal wheels to make them move faster, to make them work better, and continually broadening, expanding, and redefining what that is to now where I represent renewable energy companies, clean tech companies, waste and recycling companies, and all different kinds of things on a wide variety of environmental, climate, sustainability, and all different matters like that. And around that time, after I'd gotten some of that work, had built some of that, I got the opportunity to come to the firm I'm at now, Offit Kurman, which is a national law firm, 300 lawyers, AmLaw 200, and to chair their environmental and sustainability practice, and really to launch that practice. We had a couple lawyers who were doing environmental work, but I rebranded it as environmental sustainability and am growing the team and growing the work that we do. And it's been very exciting to do that.
And it sounds like early on in this description, you used the phrase you were looking for to make your practice more planet aligned. Tell me what planet aligned means to you. I think I have an idea and I think you've achieved it, but tell me how you would define planet aligned.
I like the word planet aligned because I like nature, right? Like I like kayak, I like to go on hikes, I like to things like that. So when I look out, I like to think, okay, am I doing something that benefits the trees?
Mhm,
Am
mhm.
I doing something that benefits the fish or the birds or things like that? So it is a broad concept to me, right? Because I think there are lots of things that are planet aligned, but I think to me, it's either I am working on a specific initiative that furthers a climate or a sustainability goal, or like I'm helping to launch a renewable energy project or build a new waste and recycling facility. Or I'm working with a company that just wants to do these things that are good. Like I have
Mhm.
colleagues that I work with you know, to support consumer product good companies that are trying to do more sustainable things with labor and employment work. And they've found their way to me a lot of times because of my mission-driven approach of being planet aligned. But so
Mm.
that's why I define it both as doing the thing that actually is planet aligned and doing something totally random that just happens to help someone else who's doing something planet aligned.
Excellent. Well, one of the ways I found my way to you was I started to get notifications about this thing and from the Planetary Lawyer Project. So tell me about that. How did that get started and how is it going?
So that's a passion project that I started about 3 years ago now. So in its most barest essentials, it's a newsletter that I started for lawyers that want to do more climate or planet friendly work. Because when I was making the transitions we talked about, I couldn't find many resources, right? Like the only thing that was talked about was go get a job in government at the EPA or at a
Mhm.
state agency where you can influence climate, or go work in private practice cleaning up sites and doing the kind of traditional environmental law. And I thought there's a whole range of options that aren't being discussed here between that sort of government nonprofit route or the very limited private practice route. And so I wanted to talk about, okay, lawyers, there's a whole lot of us who want to do this. How do we start doing this? So initially, it was just sharing jobs. I would literally just list a bunch of in-house counsel jobs at companies that were doing interesting things, whether that was renewable companies, waste and recycling, software for climate, in-house jobs so that lawyers could go, okay, well, I want to do this. I'm going to go work at that company. And we grew it to also sharing job tips, sharing interviews with other climate lawyers, really creating this community resource where lawyers could go and find out, okay, what are other lawyers doing in the climate space, in the planet friendly space? What are lawyers doing? How can I get involved? How can I grow my practice? How can I pivot my practice? How can I find a new job? How can I learn new skills? All those things. Try to put those resources at people's fingertips. And as I said, it's a passion project of mine that I've been working on alongside of being a lawyer. It's been incredibly rewarding. We have, I think, about 1,200 lawyers across the world who read it now. We have regular events, and our flagship event we call the Climate Pro Bono Boot Camp, where once a year we are going to host a virtual, maybe some in person in the future, but a virtual event where we teach lawyers how to do pro bono work that benefits the climate and the planet. And we cover a bunch of different stuff. And the idea is just to create a core of people. So that's our flagship event. And we had 700 lawyers show up for it last year.
Wow. Oh, that's exciting.
So yeah, it's really exciting to see the legal industry coming together on this, and honestly to get to continue to, be part of that community.
So you said that it originally started out as a job posting site for in-house jobs in climate friendly companies. Is that because law firms weren't looking for these sorts of skills that you felt it had somebody has to go in-house in order to practice in this area?
Not really. I think it started that way because though there were more jobs there, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, and the legal jobs I feel like aren't styled the same way, right? Like the private practice jobs aren't styled the same way.
Right.
But
Good point.
right, like Amazon has ESG council, you know, other companies have their ESG council. So you can find people with the title ESG and sustainability. And then, right, a law firm has many different clients, but it's
Mhm.
easy to pick this, you know, this zero waste company and say, well, there's an in-house job at this zero waste company. And so that's more well defined as a climate job to me. And so it was just honestly, it was the easier way to share resources.
Yep.
And so that's why we started it that way. We now include private practice jobs as
Uh,
well.
mhm.
Um, we have a partnership with Lateral Hub where we share their lateral position openings at law firms that have significant climate focuses or law jobs, private practice jobs that are focused on the environment or project finance in the renewable space, or you know, all different kinds of things that we consider planet friendly.
So what trends are you seeing in hiring for climate/ESG lawyers?
So we did just finish a little while ago an evaluation. So we started in April 2022. So from April 2022 through the end of 2023, we've shared 517 climate job postings for lawyers. And we have a PDF of the results of the statistical analysis we've done that we can drop a link to in the show notes. But
Mhm.
there were some really interesting statistics that came out of it, and I'll highlight one or two of them. First is that I think everyone assumes that renewable energy is the space to be for climate jobs. And it is a significant percentage at 24% of the climate jobs we posted were in the energy or renewable energy space.
Mhm.
But 24% is actually means three-quarters of the jobs available were not in that space,
Good
you
point.
know. And so a large percentage were a nonprofit with about 27%. And then the next biggest one actually surprised me a little bit, which was transportation. Transportation had 10.7%. But this is also one of those spaces where I think the statistics um, are a little misleading because, as I find it, it doesn't really matter what the statistics are on where the jobs are. It matters what kind of job you want. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
find that people have a better chance of chasing the jobs that they're the right best suited for, as opposed to chasing a quote unquote hot industry. One of the other interesting statistics that we saw is most climate jobs, as we've defined them, do not include climate, ESG, sustainability, or environmental in the title. Only 14% of the 500 plus jobs had those words in the title. Otherwise, these were just jobs that gave a tremendous amount of ability to influence climate, ESG, environmental without having it in the title. So this is a really good reminder to people to, when you're looking at job postings, don't just search for climate, ESG, or environmental. Be broader than that.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you want to see the job postings, we include them every week in the newsletter. So come over.
So are the statistics that you described telling the whole story?
They're really not. They're really not. As I said, right? Like you can chase a renewable energy job, you can chase the quote unquote hot industry, but it just doesn't stand in for passion, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
one of the things that I have found in my own practice is you are the person who knows best what you want to do, what your skills are, what industry is the best focus for you, what your niche is. And statistics are helpful. They can help us to figure out what we want. But at the end of the day, we need to find our own path and find our passion for this. And to me, passion is the greatest indicator of whether you're going to get hired for a job because people can really tell when you're excited about something and they know that you're going to go the extra mile. So I know it's more complicated than that, but just because a statistic doesn't show something that you want to do, I say go in the direction that you believe that is right for you, and use statistics just as a, you know, as an initial starting point, as point of inspiration.
So before we move to the next topic, I want to give you a chance to provide the URL or whatever somebody would need in order to find you and sign up to get the Planetary Lawyer Project news items.
Excellent. So it's the Planetary Lawyer Project .substack.com will take you right to the newsletter. And we will have this information there for you. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Matthew-Karmel-Sustainability, and the links will all be there too.
Excellent. So what are you seeing as the hottest emerging trends in sustainability right now?
I think that the hottest emerging trend is greenwashing still. And I know this is a long-term thing, but I think that the pervasiveness of greenwashing, I think there's been a general level of greenwashing that's been accepted for a while, and some, consumer complaints about it. And I think we're going to see an escalation of enforcement activities from the government perspective, from private plaintiff perspectives. I think we're going to see continuing enforcement, especially because the world of sustainability is getting ever more complicated and ever more sophisticated. And so as we just continue down this path, we have savvy people, we have governments that care about what's going on, and it's just going to continue developing in complexity and volume.
I completely agree with that. And I would say particularly, and perhaps irrespective of the outcome of the upcoming election here in the US, that activity is going to continue, right? The regulations might not be issued, but the private plaintiffs' activities will be there, and certainly the regulations reaching into the US from the EU and the UK will be there. What are your predictions for outcome A or outcome B for the election? What will be in store for ESG?
I tend to focus on ESG as not really politically focused. I think that my focus is more whoever wins the election, right? The pressure for ESG is going to continue to mount. I guess I was sort of surprised to see how much ESG has been walked back under the current administration, right? Like there's still backlash. So I kind of think it's not going to walk back much more under under Republican. I think that what we're going to have instead is what is more lower level enforcement, or enforcement by another name, or
Yep.
just those kinds of pieces. I tend to think that the election is not going to impact the fate to the more detailed extent of ESG and sustainability initiatives, or
Yeah,
even regulation.
I completely agree with that. And in part because of the rest of the world is marching forward. They're not going to wait for the US to figure this out. They're just moving forward, and therefore carrying a lot of the US companies along with those regs. If we talk a year from now, I often like to ask my guests to come back in a year's time. What will have changed? What will we talk about in a year?
I do think we'll be talking about the implementation of some of the US regulations, as opposed to, are they going to move forward, those kinds of things. I think we'll probably be talking about the FTC's Green Guides update, because that update hopefully will be out in a year, and that will regulate a lot of greenwashing, claims, and see how that has updated significantly. I think we're also going to be talking about consumer trends and whether there has been a significant change in consumer trends, because I think we have had a lot of sophistication on the consumer perspective, and I think we're poised for another level of that. And so I'm curious how that's going to drive different legal requirements and obligations. And then I think the other thing that we'll be talking about is how much has climate and ESG penetrated the general legal industry? We just did a presentation with the Chancery Lane Project. The Chancery Lane Project is a nonprofit that develops climate resources for lawyers on the premise that contracts govern the whole world. So if we incorporate climate considerations into contracts, we'll have done a huge amount. They just finished their US transposition so that we have a US guide for how we can incorporate climate into contracts. And I think it'll be interesting in a year's time to see how much has that penetrated, right? How many climate contracts in the US are there?
I think that's wonderful news. I certainly am aware of them. The people at Chancery Lane have been a guest on the podcast in the past. And I'm glad to hear that now they've got a US guide out. That's wonderful. So given this challenging environment, this is my last question for all my guests. What gives you hope?
I mean, the Planetary Lawyer Project, which we discussed earlier, the newsletter that I put together to help lawyers do more climate work, that's a constant source of hope for me because, as I said, we have 1,200 lawyers across the world reading that, and they're engaged and they're interested and they're trying to figure out by hook or by crook, how can they do good? How can they do good for the planet? And so seeing the number of people that are involved in this, seeing the swell, right? I always think of the trend of the universe is towards justice and the good. So that's what I see there. People coming together, good things happening, and just knowing that that is going to continue.
That gives me hope too. Thank you very much for your time, Matthew. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that our listeners will gravitate to your Substack blog and sign up for your website and get engaged. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.